You are listening to Ukrainapodden. My name is Anders Lone Fosse and I'm a journalist at Nettavisen. Today we have a very special guest, President of Kyiv School of Economics, Associate Professor of the University of Pittsburgh and former Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Agriculture of Ukraine, Tymofiy Mylovanov. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
If we start off with the Kyiv School of Economics, KSE, you work closely with the Ukrainian government, functioning as strategic advisors for them. For our Norwegian listeners with possibly limited insights into the working life as the president of KSE, what is a normal day for you when you go to work? Because I understand you travel a lot, but you also have some days in Ukraine. If we can...
Yeah, it's probably 50-50. I traveled, I actually travel a lot for multiple reasons, but let me describe a day. You just make me think about how it is. So let's take last Saturday, okay? Last Saturday, it is when I was, in fact, traveling, but I was in Ukraine. So last Saturday, I wake up in the morning after bombing. So, it really matters if we were bombed overnight or not. Because then my sleep is either, proper sleep or I'm completely lost and tired because all night I was disrupted. So I get no deep sleep, no normal sleep.
Do you sleep in your bedroom?
Yeah, I sleep in my bedroom most of the time. We are staying in some kind of what's called dacha. We bought ourselves a small dacha. A dacha is a Ukrainian or even, like Soviet Union, unfortunately, term. We try to distance ourselves from the Soviet Union, but in Ukraine it's also dacha. Dacha is a small summer house. The funny thing about it is that we're staying in the summer house for the winter because summer house is small. You don't need much electricity. You have independent water. You sort of can get through the winter. Like we bought 1,000 kilograms, 1 ton of firewood, so that will last us through the winter, no matter electricity, story. So basically, in the morning, what I do, I wake up, okay. I wake up pretty early, 6 or 7. Then I put a firewood on to warm up the house. It's a little bit back to the basics, like a village life 20 or 30 years ago in Ukraine. We have tea. My wife and I do a little bit of yoga or relaxation to come to senses, especially after bombings. And then we get into our car and we drive. Drive to Kyiv School of Economics usually. While we drive, we do messaging and calls and answering. And so that's Saturday, to be specific. Our first meeting was at 9 with an owner of a defense tech company, and we were doing consulting for him. It's an interesting consulting. They collect biodata, physiological data from pilots who operate drones and unmanned aerial vehicles. And we propose to them analytics to identify whether, let's say, changes in the success rate of hits depend on the physiological state of pilots, or it's some innovation on the Russian side. For example, if they have 15% drop in efficiency, is it because the pilot is tired, or is it because yesterday they were bombed, or is it because the technology is failing? And we now use biotechnology, bioinformatics to identify that. So that was meeting number 1.
What is the success rate, if we call it that, of the FPV drones?
Well, so that I don't know about FPVs in that specific company. They're not doing FPVs. Okay. They're doing mid strikes. I think it's a sensitive data. What's the success one is, but recently the success has dropped by 15% down.
For some reason.
For some reason they start losing some of the bombers, and so the question is it a Russian innovation in sort of anti-drone defense, or is it that the military officers are exhausted and make mistakes? Is it human factor on our side, or is it a technology issue? And, there's a lot of kind of discussion and debate, and we come in as an outside party with analytics. That's the kind of analytics we do. Then what's next? Right after that, we're already late for another meeting. Another meeting is actually with Oksana Markarova, former ambassador to the United States from Ukraine. She was just appointed an advisor to the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, on reconstruction. And I'm meeting with her in another hotel somewhere, and we're chatting. What we were chatting about? geopolitics, Trump, Zelensky, corruption, will the war is going to be over or not? We are of different camps of thought. And so we were debating it a little bit. So that was very useful.
Can you describe how different camps?
So one camp is sort of Putin is not serious. There is absolutely no way to end the war. All this is theatrics. We have to hold on until midterm elections in the United States, where we finally will get support. Okay. The other camp is, it's better to get some peace. We do not surrender Ukraine, but if there is a deal to be made, we made it, and we prepare because Russia will not stop, so we build a country. So these are two camps, and they differ in the assumptions of what will happen after the midterm elections in the United States. I am not gonna say who is who in this camp.
Okay, that was
but yes, but because I don't I'm happy to talk about my position, but I think I don't want to reveal Oksana Markarova's position.
Now you just said that you have one position and she has another.
Yes, exactly. So you're if I say what my you
go
will
deeper into that. Okay.
Yes, but or maybe later you can still ask me about this, and then you'll figure it out. But basically, yeah. So anyway, that was the second meeting, and after that, I think I had another meeting with. So I rushed to the Kyiv School of Economics because the Prime Minister is teaching. The Prime Minister of Ukraine actually teaches executive classes at the Kyiv School of Economics in the midst of political crisis and corruption and peace negotiations and everything. On Saturday, at 11 a.m., she comes and teaches a GR class, full, 50 people, talking about how the real politics works. A very candid discussion of the REC, but, and then I listened to it. She asked me some questions. I only was able to come to the last part. But, it's Prime Minister in the school, so I have to show up, and I'm late. Okay, anyway. So and then I take her to a class across, a classroom across the hallway, and it is, and she was like, where are you taking me? I'm like, Prime Minister, could you please stop by in this class? And I'm like, it's an ambush, what I'm not gonna and she's already late because she has a meeting with the president. So she's like, and I'm like, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, please, on your way. And there's all this security, and I'm late, so I storm in, and I want to enter where she's teaching. And the security all goes, haywire. They all goes can we search you? Stop, go in that room. But then the head of security, of course, knows, and he's like, let him in. He's checking his phone somewhere in the back. I'm like, oh yeah, let him in. So I let in, so it's very human, and then I take her right after the class. I take her to a classroom across where actually kids from school, school children, are being taught by a professor from our competing university, Ukrainian Catholic University, on political science. And it is organized by our undergraduate students, mathematicians. Actually, our undergraduate mathematicians, they organized a political economy training classes or club over the weekends for high school children. Okay. And they're sitting there and discussing weak ideologies, Weak, I didn't even know what that is, but apparently there's an entire field in political science, and they're discussing using cases. And then we bring a prime minister to them to see, listen, ask a couple of questions. The security is like, we need to go, So we go, she says hi, kids are all excited and puzzled at once. So we let her go. And then I run to a meeting with a major defense tech company, another one, because there we have to discuss some kind of corporate governance structure. We're helping them to structure their company better. So I go there, and also communications. It's a 15 minutes meeting. Then I realize that I forgot my adapters because I'm driving to this trip right now where I am, and then to the United States after that. So I need to have adapters. So I run home, on the way, and I'm late now for everything. And I am trying to find those adapters. I don't find those adapters. I'm like, screw it, screw the adapters. So I'm late for nothing, and I get back to Kyiv School of Economics, where a transfer bus is waiting for me. Somehow my sister shows up because she wants to talk to me about her nephew doing mathematics Olympiads. I'm like, can we do it not tonight, please? So I'm late already 1 or 2 hours, and then we get basically in a bus, minivan, and start driving to Poland. Okay, now. And I'm answering tons of emails, messages, communications, approving my Twitter, writing some, like I'm doing it for a couple of hours. And then we start arranging our transfer over the border. We want to get faster over the border, and I have government letters. So what I do is I write to the state border and ask where is a shorter line. Where should I drive? And they send me north. And I'm driving north for 2 hours, in this bus. And then they tell me, listen, we were wrong. Go south. I'm like, motherfucker. It's like plus 3 hours, okay? So we stop to eat somewhere in the middle of nowhere and turn south. There's no food. I eat some junk, at the gas station. I have all kind of continuous glucose monitoring to manage my health because of this stress and intensity. It spikes. It's totally crazy. I'm finishing the story almost. Yeah. So it's like we go south and then we run out of gas and we need to go to a gas station. We go to a gas station and there is construction and reverse, like reverse road, like in two directions. Like you have a green light and the traffic goes one way and then it's red light and the traffic goes the other way. And so we're on this road after we put the gas in our tank and some idiot decides to drive on the red, like actually a truck. On the red light, and two trucks meet each other, and on both sides now it's totally, parked, and we're sitting there for 2 hours, and then we realize we're going to be spending the night there and miss our plane. And so what we do is we start digging the asphalt off the road to get off this. Somehow we get off and drive out and finish in south. So I arrive in Warsaw at 3 a.m. with a morning flight. I don't even remember where we're flying, to Copenhagen. And so that's a day. That's a day.
I think I understand why you start the day with yoga. Just to get the relaxing start.
And we try to finish, but never works with yoga as well. But I always start with yoga and some meditation because it's impossible to get through.
You have to reset from the day before you start a new day.
It's crazy. It is great. One thing. When we were driving from my home to work, to Kyiv School of Economics, there are all these units, air defense, because the attack is ongoing. And there are guys standing with stingers, and they're standing in the street, and we're driving by us. I'm like, God, please, don't shoot while we're driving past, because they will be with the flame, we can be hit. And these guys don't care; they just shoot, and they're in the traffic, really. So it's just nuts. Everything is crazy. So you do have to do yoga or something in the morning to ground yourself in some reality, because otherwise, I think you just go crazy.
You were a minister in the Ukrainian government from August 2019 and up until March 2020. And when I read this a couple of hours ago, I compared you with Norwegian politicians, and I was thinking, that's 7 months?
6.5, yeah.
6.5. You don't really get to do that much in 7 months, but now I've heard what you do on a Saturday, and I'm starting to think, well, maybe you got something done, at least.
Yeah, two things. I was very proud of them, and I've done two things there. One is I managed with the... So it was important. There was an opportunity, political will from President Zelensky. He wanted to do land market reform, and the Prime Minister wanted to do land market reform. So that gave me space, and I'm an economist. So I come in and I do a land market reform. The story about the land market and reform is that at the time, in 2019, Ukraine was only one of the 4 countries in the world in which people who own agricultural land couldn't sell it. Okay. That's like North Korea is another one, Iran is another one, and some maybe Venezuela, some really,
It's a club you don't want to be a part of.
Yeah, frankly, and it's all very populist. And we have some long-standing populist politicians who campaign against this, but also benefit secretly from this, because what they do, they find some, schemes to work with this. But basically, people who own land, the pricing is suppressed because they cannot sell it. And so some businesses and politicians and individuals take advantage of this. So we wanted to end this. I wanted to end it because I'm an economist, and in the world, in the universe of economics, you go to heaven for creating an economic market. So I wanted to go to economics heaven in my life, and that's that's the top of the food chain. What can you do? Write a Nobel Prize paper, but even better, you create a market, okay? That's like Adam Smith stuff, it's like a core, it's DNA of economics, create a market. And I'm like, yes, I can create a market. There's an opportunity. The World Bank has all the paperwork, all the documents. Prime Minister and the President were willing to do that. So I managed to do it. In 6 months, I started the process and the land market was created. And before that, 20 years of moratorium, every year it was extended. So I'm very proud of this. And then I also did a little bit on kind of organized crime kind of stuff in alcohol production. Alcohol production was captured, was a state monopoly, but was captured by bad actors, by basically organized crime. And we managed to privatize that and decentralize it and clean it up. And so these are two things I've done in 6 months. But basically after I've done the land market, I thought I want to do education, because I realized from inside the government that government is only a part of this, and competence and ethics and values and morale of people is what matters. And so we need to educate, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands new Ukrainians, young Ukrainians, in order to change, in order to sort of, just doing reform is not enough. You have to have a lot of people who think differently. So after my work in the government, I realized that the future of Ukraine and maybe every other country is basically education and energy. Because education gives brains to people, and energy gives you compute and data and AI. And so in the future technological world of AI, what matters is that you have energy in the country to compute, and you have humans who know which questions to ask and how to work with AI. And so I've been doing education ever since 2020.
We wanted to make the people smarter.
Well, they are smart. They just don't have the tools. If people don't get good education, they get robbed. Like the way to success in life or out of poverty, not for everyone, but for majority, is through education. It's the most efficient way. Of course, you can do it through business, but you need start capital, or you can do it through connections, but that doesn't work for everyone, You can climb political ladder, but again, not everyone. But if you want to lift everyone, you do it through education. And I think that's what I've seen in the government, that so many people have to be lifted, and they want to be lifted. And that's why we need education. And we don't have a good education because the legacy universities have a culture problem, like academic integrity, a little bit of that, like hierarchy in teaching. So we're changing that.
Because I understand that after you were a minister, you were offered a post in the presidential administration of Ukraine by Volodymyr Zelensky himself, an offer which you refused?
Well, I was offered to stay as a minister, when the government was reshuffled, and I refused. And then I was offered a couple of times, including by the president, an offer to be an advisor for the so first two offers came not by the president, and the third offer came by the president, and then when president asks you, you do it. Basically that's like I serve the government. I serve the people of Ukraine. And I was asked not to. Actually, after the corruption scandal, right now I probably would have refused that offer. But at the time, my thinking was, and I completely stand behind that thinking, is that you do what is asked of you because you serve. And if it means that it is costly for you, still serve. But I didn't want to be a minister. I didn't want to take any formal position, so it was a compromise. I actually think Markarova is a little bit like that right now. She is now an advisor, and it's a little bit of a compromise. She wants to stay in private sector, but she also wants to help the government, so she takes an advising position.
What's the name you said?
Markarova, Oksana Markarova, who I met in that Saturday, who just was appointed former Ukraine ambassador to the United States.
So you mentioned that with the corruption scandal which has happened now, Andriy Yermak, among others, former head of the office of the president of Ukraine, resigned from his position as the head of the office after his home was raided by anti-corruption agents some days ago. When he left, you wrote on X that with both Yermak and Putin's envoy Dmitry Kozak gone, a new phase of negotiation could begin, perhaps with fewer grudges and more realism. So there's a lot going on right now. I don't know if you want to start with the corruption bit or the negotiation?
Let's do
bit?
negotiations and then talk corruption. So negotiations is shorter, so let's get it out of the way. So I don't think you'll kind of... I think negotiations really is determined by President Putin, President Zelensky, President Trump in the end. And negotiators are important, but they're not crucial.
Not the people around them, but those
not
three
that much.
individuals.
At this point, essentially everything is clear. One question is Putin willing to truly stop, or he's like a sadist, sort of gives hope. You know, like in these movies of serial killers, they let the victim escape almost. And then when the victim is by the door or by, so it's very sadistic. And I think maybe Putin is playing this, cat and mouse kind of stuff. Or, guys, peace will be tomorrow, and then you get bombed. And so he's trying to break the morale. Now, that's not working. And for 30 years, it's not working with Ukraine. Soft power invasion since 2014. But they still somehow can't operate in any other mode. So it could be like, if that's the story, there basically doesn't matter what we do. Now, if there is a story that finally they realize that the economy is hurting and they're killing a lot of their own people and there is internal economic structural issues and it all can come to an end, to a finale, even for Russia. And that happens. Russia from now and then has real political or financial crises. So we know that will happen one day. We just don't know when. And we know it will be spectacular. So I think if that's the case, then there is real negotiations. And it's very clear what we're negotiating over. Territory, security guarantees, frozen Russian assets. Basically, that's more or less it. And a little bit about NATO and positioning and sanction relief for Russia. There is all this talk about recognition, but I don't think that's a realistic talk because it's very difficult to do it. Europe and Ukraine and even the United States it's unclear what should the United States pass to recognize Russian capture of territory. It violate all the international law, so it's really like close to impossible. You can package it somehow, you can bullshit a little bit, do it for the headlines of tabloids, but in real sense you can't. And Putin knows it, everyone knows it. So like it's Cyprus, Cyprus, for example, is divided and is not recognized, and South North Korea, so all kinds of things. So that's historically like that. So I think negotiations are ongoing. The good news, they're ongoing. Everything else is noise. In my view, all this is theatrics. The reality is that they are ongoing and something maybe is happening behind the doors.
So what is pushing Putin towards the negotiation table if you think negotiations are actually ongoing?
Well, there are two views on this. One view is a very cynical one that he wants Donbass, and he will take Donbass in maybe 2, 4, 5, 6 years, maybe not. He hasn't been able to take it in 2 years. In 4 years, right?
Yeah. Norwegian estimates from Palle Ydstebø is a Norwegian expert. He says if they continue with this same speed they have done the last 3 years, it will take another 3 years.
Yes.
And thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of lives.
Yes. So the trade from, in Machiavellian sense for him might be, okay, I'm going to take it right now for free. I'm going to have a pause for 3 years and then I'll continue. So that's better than, and plus I won't get it destroyed completely. Now that might be one. The other one, it might be that the economy is truly hurting. It is hurting, but I don't know if they care about it, okay? And also maybe they want to move on or something else, because what we know historically from Russia, that they fight for 5 years or 10 years or 3 years, and then they move on to a different country, and then they can revisit it later, but they sort of do one country at a time. And so they might have other objectives. But I don't know. So these are the angles. Some other people are saying that they're not serious.
I'm writing a story for the weekend these days about the Russian economy because fresh poll numbers from Levada shows that at this time there is the lowest amount since October 2023 that feels that Russia is heading in the correct direction. Yeah, so it's sinking the amount of people who thinks it's going okay, and when the people are asked, the respondents are asked, okay, but why isn't it's going so good right now? There are two things they are saying. It's one, it's that the war is dragging out. It's costing a lot of lives, and that they don't have as much money as they used to be, and it's low payments and low pensions, and the prices are rising. So we are starting maybe to see some sort of, I don't know if unrest is the correct
Not
word.
quite unrest, but
No.
discontent, maybe.
Yeah.
What's the percentages on people saying in the latest poll?
Yeah, well, still 65% are answering at least. We don't know if that's what they really think, but they are at least answering that it's heading in the right direction. 65%. And that's the lowest it has been seen since October 2023. It's been steadily going down, at least the last 1.5 years. It was 75% of the summer of 2024.
Yeah, so the same dynamics is actually in Ukraine polls. Ukrainian also saying that we're not going in the right direction, but the effect might be corruption, by the way, scandal, rather than that might be the main factor for recent change. And then also that the economy, cost of living, inflation. So we see similar forces on both sides in the population. And it basically suggests that both politicians on both sides experience pressure to come to some kind of agreement or at least oppose. So I think that's the fundamental gravity. And that's why I'm optimistic that peace will happen. Maybe not in these months, but soon, within months, or maybe within like several tens of months. I don't want to say years, but I also don't want to give some kind of forecast. But I think the 26 is very likely that peace will happen.
But I'm guessing you agree that it's easier for Russia to save money on war than it is for Ukraine.
Well, so Ukraine is of course a weaker economically country, much weaker, but it also has a lot of support from the rest of the world. And even though this support at times is delayed and is not as large as possible, but if Ukraine gets in a really tough spot, support will increase. I am confident in two things. I'm confident that Europe will not abandon, and even the United States, will not abandon Ukraine. And the second one is actually for very pragmatic and strategic purposes, both strategic and pragmatic. Strategic is no one wants to empower Russia. And pragmatic is the cost of investment in defense, and therefore subtracting money from social support, pensions, and teacher salaries will be much higher if Ukraine falls or implodes than if Ukraine stands. So that's a pragmatic and strategic reason. So that's one thing I'm sure of. And the second one is fortress. Russia is not fortress. This is just it's just actually a fake. Militarily, they can't, they scaled up drone production, but we also scaled up drone production. Last week, over 1,000 drones attacked Kyiv. People die, and it's awful, but 1,000 drones should destroy Kyiv, and they're not even close, So that means Ukraine has a very proper, very decent air defense. And so Ukraine is scaling up. It's a question of resources. Of course, Ukraine could stop it if it was given more resources, but you sort of, I think that's a big shame that not enough resources are given to Ukraine to stop the war. But fundamentally, I think Ukraine will not be abandoned, and I also think Russia hasn't got the stomach or energy or money or technology or people to take over Ukraine.
We touched somewhat on the corruption scandal earlier in the episode. How do you feel about it? And maybe more importantly, how optimistic are you for the future of the trust to the Ukrainian government?
Well, so first of all, I think people are in Ukraine are really upset about the scandal. And that's why we have seen such a political reaction. You can, there are no elections, and you can think that while there is a war, politics will be suspended, but it is not. You have seen the MPs, members of parliament, dissent even from the party of, Sluga Naroda, people's servant, who are incumbent party, who has presidential party. Yeah. So that's because they also are very upset. Everyone is upset. So there are two phrases. This is not Ukraine. This is not us. If anything, this is kind of old guard, it's kind of Russian style of, it's those pro-Russian parties when they were in power used to do this, and now someone else is doing it. So that's not Ukraine. That's not what, people are really upset. And the second one is no backsliding. It feels like there is a sense of backsliding on corruption, Not even that it happens, it does happen, but it's not, it was not like that a year ago or two. So that has to stop right now. It has to stop strongly. So I think that's the overall popular dissent, and to the extent that it really doesn't matter who is in power, which government, which president, whoever, it's not going to be that. Of course, people are careful because they don't want to, destabilize the political environment during the wartime, because we understand that it might lead to, to basically even losing the country. So it's existential. So, but at the same time, I think that that's a red line for many, many people, for a lot of organizations, saying that the government has to be much more serious in fighting corruption. It really has to make a decision. I also think the way the government responded to it, President Zelensky firing his top person, basically. And I think it's a sacrificial lamb, in a sense, that you have to do it politically. It's not that there is an accusation against him, but there is a political accusation against him. So that's I think, a reason, the real reason. And the second one is that we have seen how the government started a lot of action against corruption, and a lot of this action is proactive. What I think is true, that is Ukrainian government cannot afford any more bad news. It has to, or if there is bad news, it has to be coming from the government itself, meaning that the government uncovers corruption. Now, if the government hears, if there's any more bad news, people of Ukraine will change the government. I'm 100% confident. I might be wrong, but my sense is there is any more bad news from the government, it's the last chance. There will be a change of government during the war, notwithstanding, and the military will stand strong on this. They will hold the line, I think. So I think it's really a very vulnerable moment for Ukraine, and these people who were in the network, in a very sophisticated, corrupt network, they're really, are awful people who, I'm really angry, and I think a lot of people are angry about them, that they've done that during the war. So my sense is Ukraine is cleaning up, but also this is not Ukraine. That's how people feel. And they're really upset at the officials and politicians and some businessmen who were part of this. Yeah. So I think there is a lot of demand.
Because I think I've seen some pro-Russian propaganda over the last 2 weeks, which is most of it is about, if Zelensky or the current government has to go, then Ukraine will collapse and Russia will win. But
I don't think it's true. So first of all, Russia always pushes. Even on the eve of the full-scale invasion, Putin gave a speech, and in this speech he talked about corruption. He always it's within their overall approach, a very systemic, very strategic approach of delegitimizing the government. They want to take legitimacy away. They say, there haven't been no elections, or they are corrupt, or they will collapse. It's propaganda. Ukraine will not collapse. Ukraine will not collapse, full stop. I think people have to Russian government has to beat it in their heads that Ukraine will not collapse. It didn't collapse in 2014 when it didn't have any military. It definitely will not collapse today when it has one of the most advanced militaries in the world. Now, our political processes is our own domestic business, and that's also what Russia needs to learn. This is our own business, mind your own business. We don't intervene in anyone's business. You don't intervene in us. Don't even give up your hope that we somehow will not clean it up, We'll clean it up, I think. It is true that a lot of people are afraid to push very hard on some politicians because they think, destabilization could be a little bit too much. And at the same time, it's also true that Russia tries to amplify the corruption scandal. But the corruption scandal is there. Corruption has been there. And, it's a big lesson for everyone that you can't afford to be sort of semi-clean. You have to be 0 or 1. You have to have zero tolerance to corruption. There's no compromises. You cannot, I think there's a lot of cultural change right now in Ukraine because of that. I think it's very disruptive in the short term. It hurts Ukraine in short term, the scandal itself. But I think it's also very beneficial to Ukraine in the medium to the long term. And it also sort of, in truly authoritarian and corrupt countries, people fall out of windows rather than the anti-corruption agencies find corrupt officials and indict them. So it tells you that institutions in Ukraine are working. Anti-corruption institutions are working. And it also tells you that the government continues to function during a crisis because they just reached an agreement with the IMF in the midst of the crisis. And negotiations are ongoing in the midst of the crisis. So actually, Ukraine has built institutions during the war, because even 5-10 years ago, that type of crisis would completely destabilize the government, even in peaceful times. So I think if you look at it objectively, Ukrainian institutions demonstrate their strengths. People demonstrate it's a vibrant democracy, and I think politicians have to take note.
And the protests in the summer as well.
Yes, and they also were very contained, right? They were very limited. They would say, listen, we don't like this policy. They were not political against the president or against incumbent party, right? And right now, some people who I consider to be actually pro-Russian, provocateurs, they are calling for protests every Saturday and Sunday, and no one shows up to the protests, The protests are actually happening, de facto protests are happening through the parliament. The parliament has shown legitimacy and, puts pressure on the government and the president to make changes. So that's very interesting. The street protests didn't happen this time, exactly because Russian provocateurs are asking for that.
There are pro-Russian protests in Kyiv these days?
Well, there's some people, there are people trying on Facebook every Friday, say, we have to protest the government, and no one shows up. A couple of drunks, show up and they hold one sign, and then you ask them what this. Well, anyway, I don't want to badmouth them, but I really think they're idiots,
Sorry, it's not often I laugh on this podcast, but there's some sentences that, it really triggers me when you say, you don't want to call them names and then...
call them names.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Well,
I don't want it, but I still do. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, if we try to be a little more serious here, I read that your research interests cover such areas as theory of games and contracts. What is game theory? What kind of games are we talking about here?
Yeah, well, this is not kind of games that we play with each other as humans. There are books about this. No, it's not psychology. And it's not games like we play on computers, it's not Counter-Strike or something like that. Game theory is a serious science in economics. There's also a branch in mathematics and in some other fields, but we're talking about economics. It was introduced actually in early 20th century, but became really popular after John Nash has written 2 academic articles, 1950, 1952, and later got a Nobel Prize for that. A movie, Beautiful Mind. It's not really precise academically speaking, but it popularizes John Nash and his contribution. And the idea is that, humans are used to think and live linearly. We think of time linearly. We think of time as I was born yesterday. I woke up that Saturday. I got in the car and I drove to a lecture by Prime Minister. That's very linear thinking. There's you can have a timeline. So that's how we think about it. And the same we think about cause and consequence. I did something and that created something else. I innovated and created a new drone, so I intercepted a missile tonight and I saved lives. So one follows after another. Game theory makes it circular, meaning that what I do is a cause for what you do, and what you do is a consequence of what I do, but also is a cause of what I do. So we influence each other simultaneously. If you have 2 companies, and I expect that one company will drop a price, I will drop a price. But because they expect me to drop a price, they also will drop a price. So we simultaneously affect each other. If, on the other hand, I expect to invest in new major startup, you also might decide to invest in it. Why? Because you want to be, at least not to be left out. You might have a fear of missing out. But that's because of my action, because what I do. And I might be afraid that you are doing it without me, so I will invest too. So game theory has this idea that my actions depend on your actions, but also cause your actions. So it's not linear anymore, it's circular. And so that's the kind of thinking which is present in economics in other areas, all kinds of equilibrium arguments, how the markets clear, how investments happen, how humans develop countries and nations. And so this is what we study mathematically in game theory. And it's a method. And this method basically can be applied to any interactive situation where there are several players. We call them players. But basically there are several actors, someone who can act. And it always in the same framework. You identify who act, who have agency, who has the power to do something. You identify what they can do, what information they have, and what are their objectives. You can study actually Russian-Ukrainian negotiations through this, or American internal politics through this. Anything where there are conflicting interests and people can act, can do something and affect, you can study and model through game theory. And that's what the field does.
Can you use this theory to try to understand why Vladimir Putin decided to invade Ukraine in the first place?
So it's a philosophical argument. What's the value of science? Scientific method tells us that we can predict what Vladimir Putin will do if we can put him in a lab. We are now speaking through a microphone, and through magnetic waves, it might be distributed later, or through hardware, this will be recorded on computer, and then, people will see video of this or audio, right? Now, in order to get that technology in place, humans, scientists and entrepreneurs experimented a lot. They repeated one thing over and over and over. In economics, you cannot do that. You cannot have 5,000 Earth in which there are 5,000 wars between Putin and whoever, and then model his behavior in different situations. So you kind of have to guess. There are other fields, not just economics, not just humans, but for example, astronomy. We cannot do experiments on planets. We cannot say, Earth will be slightly different or Sun will be slightly different. But it's still a very precise science, astronomy. Whereas economics is imprecise. So what our theoretical models do, they actually help us understand whether we're thinking clearly. So we cannot predict what President Putin will do, but we can compare different logical models about what he can do. If you make an argument and I make an argument, we can put it in models in terms of game theory, and we can verify whether your or my argument are logically coherent, and maybe expand a little bit. So it's a modeling framework. It will not give us the truth, but it will help us model. So in some sense, long answer is we can help predict what President Putin will do, but it's not truly scientific in a sense of experiment.
But when he so clearly specifies that if he gets Donbass, then he's done, that
he might be lying, right? And we know he lies. So we can model that too. We can even model probability of lying, or we can look at all of his previous historical statements and look what is the frequency that he lied with. So all of that could be put in a model.
Yeah. I think it was Maria Zakharova, which 12 days before the full-scale invasion said, we don't have any aggressive offensive plans.
Yes. Well, so there's that is easy to model. You just multiply by -1 mathematically what they say, right? If they say recently that, listen, we don't want to go to war with Europe, but if Europe decides to go, we are ready. You multiply it by -1 and say, well, we want to go to war in Europe if there is an opportunity, right? And that actually tells me that they are more likely sadists than rational people, unfortunately. Now, we can also model sadists, and we know, and then that supports the logic that we need to contain them with physical force, with military, rather than with political discussions. Because they do not respond to all these rational arguments, they just want to fight. So how do you stop people? You put a lot of robots on the border, right? So, I think the future is clear. We robotize the border with Russia.
You have a busy schedule. You have to go do yoga at some point, reset, and just relax a little bit.
Yes.
But I would like to ask you one last question, because when we are talking about these surprises, what has surprised you the most during this almost 12-year long war now?
Human nature. I think how the war can affect people very differently. How some people can become extremely cruel and cynical, corrupt in our case in Ukraine, or being basically torturers, murderers in case of Russian military. And how they can bring the best in humanity, where people travel and risk their lives and die to save others, or evacuate them, or to defend the country. So, I'm very proud of humans, of the humankind, because I've seen a lot of the best of humanity in this war, but I also have seen a lot of the worst of humanity. I've read about this in books, but when you read it in books, it's sort of a little bit theoretical.
Theory, yeah.
Yeah, but when you see it next to you, when you see a village in which you had coffee, and there have been war crimes where you see that your student has been tortured or your student has been killed, that brings it home in so many ways, and it's painful. We have a little website, heroes.kc.org.ua, where you just go through names and pictures and stories of people students and graduates of KC who have died, and it's very painful. And you just go through them. But at the same time, you've seen real heroes, and you realize that every human is a hero, or can be a hero, and it's so empowering because you see that it's choice. A Russian military soldier, they walk to die basically. The Russian military sends them to attack and they die, but they can surrender and they choose not to. Russian people can choose not to support Putin, but it's difficult. It's a collective action problem. But each of them can privately sabotage this, but they don't. People type in coordinates, don't make mistakes, work on factories, And at the same time, you see people who, even in Russia, you see people who risk their lives and go to prison or die in order to stop the war. And you see a lot of Ukrainians who sacrifice their life. But you also see Ukrainians who run away from war and sometimes illegally and escape, all kinds of things. You see, humans are so diverse. And in real life, in peaceful time, you don't see that. But the war makes it brutally honest about each human, who they are. And I think that's the most surprising. How, the moment you strip this facade from a human, the diversity of humans, the worst and the best of humans, I think is the most intriguing part. I'm in some sense blessed to have experienced that, but it is very painful.
President of Kyiv School of Economics, Tymofiy Mylovanov, thank you so much for joining Ukrainapodden.
Thank you.